I just again want to thank the people that helped put public in the room this year. These people all helped sponsor travel for the public, and it's something we turned people away because we still didn't have enough money, but we really appreciate the assistance getting the public here and participating. Also want to thank PHMSA again for the webcast. I forgot to ask the webcasters how many people were tuned in yesterday, but welcome to our webcast audience from across the U.S. We were getting questions from folks, so I know there was people tuned in. And we're going to just move right into the program, especially since I messed up and froze the computer first thing. But, you know, I think I mentioned yesterday that I kind of live this weird charmed life where I get to eat beignets this week and poutine next week and get to hang out with some pretty amazing people for reasons I don't understand how I ended up getting in a position where I end up at the White House with the Secretary of Transportation and Marie-Therese comes and visits us in Bellingham and get to testify to Congress. It also puts me in weird situations sometimes. I think it was last January I got invited to go up to Canada, to Calgary, which is an easy flight for me. I drive across the border through farmland, get in a little airplane in Abbotsford, and an hour later I'm in Calgary. Because the NEB had heard that we were doing this transparency indicator project with SEPA, and they kind of wanted to know more about it. So I thought I was going into Calgary to meet with 2 or 3 NEB staffers. Pretty relaxed meeting is what I was expecting, and I get there and they usher me into this big room and there's like 40 of them and they were waiting for Peter Watson, the chair of the NEB, to show up, and I'm thinking, oh, what have I got myself into now? And that's right where we're going to start today. You know, it was a pretty amazing meeting there. I got to meet with a lot of the senior staff for the NEB. There was real commitment to what we were trying to do in the whole movement towards transparency. And if you living right on the border, I get about half of my news from the CBC and from Canadian TV because we get better reception of that than we do the U.S. And it's much more pleasant to watch these days than all the campaign stuff. And they make great fun of our elections. But there's a great commitment I learned for NEB for moving forward. And if you watch the news, you know, they've got a whole number of big projects up there. And Peter Watson's got one of those jobs that it's like, boy, talk about being between a rock and a hard place most all of the time. But really appreciated my interactions with him on transparency and indicators. And we're going to hear from him right now talking about those things. So welcome, Peter Watson, the chairman of the National Energy Board.
I hope I don't screw up your computer.
Just don't touch anything.
Okay, I'll try. Thanks very much for that kind introduction, Carl, and it's a real pleasure for me to be joining you here today. It's my first opportunity to attend a conference of the Pipeline Safety Trust. I've been with the National Energy Board for 2 years now. I think last year a couple of our members were here, but having said that, I'm really pleased to have an opportunity to be here myself. These kinds of forums really speak to the value of having inclusive dialogue amongst all the stakeholders and people that are passionately concerned about pipeline safety. Whether that's regulators like me, whether that's companies that are doing that work every day, whether it's members of the public and people in communities affected by energy infrastructure, whether it's environmental organizations, First Nations, everybody cares about pipeline safety. Everybody needs to understand what the concerns are with respect to safety, and we need to be talking about what we're doing about those concerns. The dialogue is really, really important to us, particularly as a regulator. We understand, probably more so than ever before, that we have a very public role to play. And we have to be better at listening to and engaging with the public than perhaps we've ever been before, given the issues that we face today in the context around energy resources and energy systems going forward. In Canada, the public depends on their government, and through the government, they depend on us as the pipeline regulator to provide assurance that pipelines are built and operated safely, and that people, communities, and the environment are protected. Now, I understand that It's the good work of the companies involved that ensure that pipelines are constructed and operated safely. But having said that, the public does rely on their governments and mechanisms that the government puts in place through policy and mandates given to institutions like ours to assure the public that safety is being addressed and appropriate steps are being taken. Many people in our country probably don't even understand that a pipeline is in their backyard. Those people depend on us to assure them and their communities that risks are being taken care of, because they might not even be aware of the risks, and they might not even be aware how to get across their issues. That's why the work of the Pipeline Safety Trust, I think, is actually so valuable in bringing people together, and particularly the creation of the interface between public and industry and regulators to talk about the issues around pipeline safety. It is the responsibility that public institutions like us bear when we're charged with the full life cycle regulation of energy infrastructure. In Canada, the National Energy Board does not decide whether a major pipeline project should be built or not. Ultimately, that's the Government of Canada's decision after we conduct a review and provide a recommendation to them. However, one of our key roles, as I said, is to do the review and to recommend to the government how a major pipeline project can be done to ensure that it is in the public interest if the government decides that it should go forward, and more importantly, how the safety of citizens and the environment is assured as a result of proceeding with the project. And we're fiercely committed to that role of public assurance. It's one of the reasons that in some of our decisions, you typically see a lot of conditions. Many of those things are put forward because our members believe that without those conditions being satisfied, the project could not be in the public interest and the project might not be able to be constructed and operated safely. And we follow through from those conditions, follow through regarding those conditions, because we're a full life cycle regulator of the pipeline infrastructure in Canada from cradle to grave. A little bit about us, if you don't know about us, we're a relatively small organization, about 400, 450 people. We're based in Calgary, Alberta. We regulate over 73,000 kilometers. I can't even remember what the conversion to miles is anymore. 55,000 miles. We regulate the pipeline infrastructure that crosses provincial boundaries or crosses international boundaries. That's where the federal jurisdiction in Canada kicks in. As Carl mentioned earlier, there's many more miles of pipeline infrastructure that is contained entirely within a province, and that falls under provincial responsibility under our Constitution in Canada. We operate at arm's length from the Government of Canada. We operate independently when we're conducting our reviews and making our recommendations and our decisions. And that independence is actually quite important. We feel it's critical in maintaining our credibility, in maintaining our reputation, and maintaining the integrity of our regulatory processes. We also believe that it facilitates high standards of expertise and professionalism within our organization, and we do take it very seriously. But independence doesn't mean that we operate in a vacuum. We're part, and we understand, probably more than ever before, we understand that we're part of a complex energy system that is at play in our country and across our two countries. And that energy system touches the lives of every single stakeholder, regardless of what their particular stake is in the system. All of us, whether we're companies, whether we're communities, whether we're governments, government agencies like ours, citizens, we are working or interacting within the same system. So our view is the NEB as a regulator and playing a critical role in a portion of that system. We have to be able to understand the issues that span the system. If we're going to be credible in our assurance to the public that we serve, that we are in fact doing our part to ensure that pipelines are built and operated safely, we have to understand the issues in the system. You can't be credible about stuff you don't know about. You also can't be credible if nobody knows you and nobody has an opportunity to interact with you to gain trust, to build a relationship and gain trust in your ability to do your work well and to provide assurance over the issues they care about. Again, think of those citizens living and working in communities all across our country today that may not know that pipeline infrastructure is, in their community. The public wants, expects, and is increasingly demanding an opportunity to see for themselves that folks like us at the NEB are on the job. That expectation must be satisfied. We're no longer in an environment where we only need to satisfy ourselves as the supposed experts on pipeline safety that we're doing the right things. We have to be able to assure the public of that as well. We have to be more open and transparent with the public. Part of that is getting better at communicating what the NEB does as a life cycle regulator. A lot of people only think of the NEB as the one that comes to town and conducts a public hearing on whether a new project should proceed or not. Many, many people in Canada are not aware, frankly, that we regulate the full life cycle of the infrastructure that's in the ground, and we have this fundamental role on public safety and environmental protection. So we're doing a lot more work and a lot more outreach to help people understand that. But while we're getting better at communicating and engaging with the public, it is also about examining and challenging our own performance, along with providing sufficient public information about our performance so that others can assess us and reach their own conclusions about our performance. And this is really part of the transformation that we're going through at the NEB right now. We currently find ourselves in what I call the heat and light of the big pipeline adjudication processes. As you all know, in your country and in ours, these processes are the very controversial, headline-grabbing, and increasingly iconic focal points for energy policy debates in our country and in yours. They're very important processes, and when we conduct an adjudication process, we try to do that to the best of our abilities, and we do that in a way that's consistent with our defined and legally prescribed role in accordance to our mandate. We know that given the context today, we actually can't satisfy everyone in that role as we go forward. Some of those debates around energy policy are getting very polarized, and one of our roles as a public institution is actually to complete a review and make a recommendation whether a project should go forward. So we understand when we undertake that role that not everybody that's involved in the process is going to be happy with us, and that's clearly some of the press that Carl reads about when he reads about the NEB. And we also know that these adjudication processes are not the sum and total of the role that we play as a regulator. The transaction that arises from a public hearing in our country, and that is a recommendation or a project approval if the Government of Canada agrees that the project is in the public interest and should proceed, is actually only the very first step in satisfying our duty to Canadians around the assurance of pipeline safety and environmental protection. Regardless of the heat and light on project hearings, we're still active and we're accountable every day for making sure that the 73,000 kilometers of pipe under our jurisdiction is being maintained and in service safely with minimal disruption or risk to the people who live and work around them every day. And again, I don't want to discount the role of the companies and the operators, but we have an oversight role on top of that, and the public depends on it and needs to understand it, and as I said earlier, have the information to appreciate whether the company is doing good work and whether we're doing good work. It is that public assurance role, the life cycle oversight, the people on the ground, the things that we do in communities, the initiatives that we take to drive improvements in safety and environmental protection where we must clearly demonstrate our performance to the satisfaction of all Canadians, speaking on behalf of the NEB. In the past year, we've taken a much more deliberate approach to public assurance at the NEB. For starters, we are actively changing the way we assess our own performance and our competence internally, and we're putting structures in place to recalibrate our thinking towards a more critical and focused cycle of continual improvement. We are actively striving for regulatory excellence, and we're utilizing our definition of regulatory excellence. We're borrowing it from the body of work that was led by the Alberta Energy Regulator and developed by the University of Pennsylvania. The attributes of regulatory excellence that came out of that work, utmost integrity, stellar competence, and empathic engagement, are the foundation for our work, our programs, the activities we undertake, and the managerial results or approach, the managerial approach that we use to achieve the results we want to see. We've established a new corporate management system within the NEB that defines and describes how we will fulfill our role and how we will drive continual improvement in the way we work. Just like the companies, we actually regulate the management systems of the companies that we oversee. If you know anything about the regulations in Canada, you know that we not only have some prescriptive requirements, but we also have very, very broad performance-based requirements, and we audit companies' management systems all the time. One of the first things I said to our organization when I arrived is that if we expect them to be excellent like that, we better look at ourselves and ensure that we've implemented as comprehensive a management system inside our own organization for our own performance on behalf of the public. And that's what we're doing, and we've defined that management system, and we're in the process of putting it in place right now. And with that focus in place, we're updating our performance framework to recognize our ambition for regulatory excellence. We see this framework that describes the performance that the public and companies and the citizens should expect from us as an opportunity to better report to our Parliament, to better report to all Canadians regarding our public assurance role and the results that we're expected to deliver. Our performance framework will describe to the public exactly what we're doing to fulfill our mandate, and it'll describe the performance indicators that we are using to measure our effectiveness. And that's one of the reasons that I've been interacting with Carl on performance indicators over the last little while, including participating in the workshop in Calgary in May. Through the framework, we're capturing and being crystal clear about the purpose and the intent of our work, including how effective our regulatory oversight is at influencing and improving industry performance. We hope that it will allow us to clearly and credibly demonstrate that we're serious about this public assurance role on behalf of Canadians. And I really think it's important to note that we're not developing these performance indicators in isolation. In order to be effective, the indicators need to make sense, and they need to reflect the interests of the range of the people that we serve, from landowners to parliamentarians, from academics to environmental groups, and of course, it must reflect the interests of the industry that we regulate. We can't assume, and we shouldn't assume, that we know what information the public is looking for or needs about our performance. We should go out and talk to them and ask them, what do you need? We shouldn't assume. To that end, we have been consulting and we have been working with others and participating in other forums to talk about indicators, and we have been consulting across Canada. And one of the things that we did recently was reach out to all the attendees from the May meeting that was hosted by the Pipeline Safety Trust in Calgary on a set of draft indicators earlier this summer that, as I said, that will form the basis of our framework that we're putting in place. So we have to engage people on these indicators and ensure that we've done a good job at addressing the things that they care about. And this leads me to another aspect of our public assurance role. which is engagement with the public and transparency around how we conduct our regulatory function. I think for regulators like ours and organizations with a long history and significant expertise in technical matters, my observation over the course of my career is that you can run a risk of getting pretty disconnected from the people that you ultimately serve. And I'm talking about the citizens, again, that count on us for the assurance of safety and environmental protection. And that's because we see a lot. We see it in a very in-depth way. It's very technical information, usually when we're assessing the design of a pipeline, for example. We sometimes forget that we need to demystify this for lay people that aren't involved in pipeline safety every day, that may not understand some of the concepts. And we shouldn't just walk around expecting the public to just trust us, because we do this, and this is what we do every day. We have to be as good as we can at speaking openly and plainly to the public. But one of the things that comes as a result of doing that, it takes more time to do that. And it takes a real focus and a continued commitment to do that. And that is also really hard in this day and age when everybody is just consumed with sound bites and short interactions and tweets, and real focus and real time and effort is what it takes. In our situation in Canada, and I'm not sure if it's different for PHMSA and other regulators here in the U.S., one of the things we find a challenge is because we have innumerable citizens, communities, First Nations, interest groups that expect and should hear from us in that public assurance role, since we're a national institution regulating pipeline safety. But we also deal with very long linear infrastructure. So there's hundreds and thousands of interfaces that are involved and need to be involved. And the information that they need is often very specific to their interests, to their communities, to their regions, and so on. Now, we work with the companies and we test their systems for providing information to communities and individuals and landowners. And we really need companies to continue to do that great work each and every day. But again, the public also needs to hear from the regulator. The public also needs to understand about our performance and what we're doing. And so that's a bit of a challenge, because we're a small organization and we've got a large geography and a wide range of interests who each have very specific things that concern them. It does make it really hard for an organization like ours to stay proactive and to stay responsive. And it does make it easy to perhaps lose some focus, get overwhelmed, and kind of retreat into the, we know what we're doing, so everybody should take comfort in that. It's not good enough. So this is another reason why we're putting a lot of effort into updating our performance framework and into our internal management system. Good frameworks, good systemic practices will help us ensure that we stay on track, will help us ensure that we're identifying issues properly, will help us ensure that we're continually assessing and innovating to deliver on our responsibilities in the most efficient and comprehensive way possible. And that's a key part of the transformation that we're making at the National Energy Board today. We've identified that we have to be much more transparent. And we've been working actively to make that shift towards having more information, both about company performance in Canada, as well as the performance of our activities as a regulator, openly available to the public. As I stated earlier, it is critical for us to first understand what information our stakeholders want to see about our performance and about industry's performance. We must make the time and space to engage and listen to the public, not only to consult on decisions we're making in our adjudication processes, which are very open and transparent, but throughout the entire range of the regulatory life cycle. And again, we need to be present. We need to be present with people and communities to offer assurance back to them that we hear their concerns, that we act on them, and that we are on top of the work that we do each and every day. That is why we've opened a couple new regional offices in Canada, because interestingly, when I arrived, our footprint was entirely contained in Calgary. And I felt we needed to have a presence in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia and in Eastern Canada, so we've opened up offices both in Montreal and Vancouver to facilitate engagement with the public in those regions, and to be there to talk to them about energy issues and pipeline regulation in their communities. One of the first initiatives that we ran out of those offices was a consultation process as part of our Emergency Management Transparency Initiative. Now, I mention this specifically because I think, as many of you know, emergency management, how the system will respond in the case of what if something happens, is a very real concern for many, many communities and many people that are affected by pipelines. Our consultation resulted in several concrete actions being taken, including our decision to have companies post their emergency procedures online. And while we were reviewing manuals, we felt that we should take this additional step for transparency's sake. And it was a first in North America, and for me, a symbol of the nature of the transparency that's needed around these issues. Now, we allow exemptions from the posting so that personal information from employees of companies aren't posted and certain types of security information isn't there. But the remainder of the information we felt should be publicly open and transparently available. And it was just simply, if we're to be credible to describe to the public how they can have confidence in what we will do if something goes wrong, we just need to give them information to help them understand what we do. And we have to do that to keep building public trust. We plan to continue meaningful and sustained outreach and engagement with those folks that we talked about emergency management with, whether they're first responders, Indigenous peoples, municipalities, and other stakeholders that are involved in emergency management. And we're going to keep engaging with them on those issues, as well as the host of other issues that are relevant to life cycle regulation. Another example of our commitment to transparency is our new online data hub. Using this online tool, we're now providing open access to the range of regulatory performance data that we have, including a table of company commitments and their status, non-compliances that we've identified through our inspections and other oversight work, and most recently, incident cause data, which is a direct result of some of the feedback that we heard from the work of Carl and the Pipeline Safety Trust in the report that they did for SEPA about the information that stakeholders wanted to see. And we're paying real close attention to the data that we gather and how we manage that data and making those data sets openly and publicly available. I'm not saying that we're really good at it yet, but everything and all of our data sets are going to be moving forward through that data hub once we get them fixed up. And you know, we've got some very basic problems to fix, like stop using paper systems in certain things and get issues automated so that we can make it easily available for people. So we're doing that, and as we do that, everything will go on this online data hub. We're also working hard to find better ways to share really, you know, what I think is complex information for most ordinary people about Canada's energy production and consumption story. We also conduct monitoring of energy markets generally for Canada and provide regular reports and analysis around the status of energy markets. And one of the ways we're doing this is using online data visualization technology to help it become a more user-friendly experience. So that it's not just energy analysts and people that are involved in the energy business that understand what some of our supply and demand forecasts mean. So again, we're taking significant strides forward to make information accessible to average, ordinary Canadians so that they can become better informed and they can take a more active part in the dialogue around energy issues. Because we all know that when a project comes to their community, they get very interested about becoming informed. So these are just a couple of examples, and you're going to see from us that things like these data visualizations, we're going to utilize them to start telling the pipeline safety story as well. So I would encourage people to go on our website and take a look at our latest Energy Futures report and those data visualizations that are there to help people understand energy production and consumption in Canada. And we're spending more effort and more resources at bringing more to the forefront utilizing those methods. So those are just a couple of examples, and as I said, there's more work in store. But the key point is that the work to continually improve our performance as a regulator never ends. Our commitment to safety, to the safe and responsible operation of energy infrastructure and the protection of the environment never ends. The NEB will continue to listen inclusively to stakeholders. We'll continue to be present and open through forums such as this, through engagement on the ground in communities across our country, through online mechanisms. We'll continue to diligently examine our own performance. And I'm really, really, quite happy that we've cracked the nut, and we're putting in place a performance framework where people can see and judge us and understand whether we're making a difference or not. The public deserves and really demands this kind of information, and they demand an energy regulator that is absolutely focused on pipeline safety and environmental protection. And part of our role as a public institution is to assure them and to prove to them that that's exactly what we're doing on their behalf. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. One of my dreams over the next year is to somehow do a comparison of the way they do it in Canada versus the way we do it in the U.S., because there's some fascinating lessons there somewhere, and I haven't had time to actually sit down and do that, because the NEB clearly does things better than PHMSA does in some areas, and PHMSA clearly does things better than the NEB in some areas, and it'd be interesting for groups of people that work cross-border to kind of start to try to identify those things and fan that flame of competition that Marie-Theresa mentioned yesterday about who's going to be the leader in regulatory authority.